I would love to introduce a beautiful person to you. This is Neelanthi, known to us usually as Neela Vadivel. She originally comes to us from Montreal, her heritage being both from Sri Lanka and from England. So she's already a very multicultural person to begin with, and she began early in her life with a high degree of culture by attending a dance school that was exclusively for dancers. And so I think she's going to be able to tell us a little bit more about her biography, but I do want to let you know that she became a professional dancer. She was in a number of different companies, dance companies, where she not only performed, she also did choreography. And her talents were recognized by Cirque du Soleil, where she became one of the lead dancers there. And then as she became more well-known for her abilities to choreograph and to organize other people, she was actually hired as their artistic director, which is a position she served in for many years. Before we at Stella Moving Center were able to hire her, and she's operations manager for Stella Moving Center and the artistic director for our retreat aspect of Stella Moving Center. So without further ado, I want to introduce Neela Vadivel to talk to us from the dance tradition about today's theme, which is the Willing Apprentice. Neela.
Thank you. Mahalo, Renee. And mahalo to everybody. I felt really inspired when Renee gave me the topic of the Willing Apprentice. Now, this is a room full of learners, seekers of knowledge. This is not news to you, but I think that there is, so from my perspective, a real interesting parallel with my experience as a professional dancer. So as somebody who is continuing to learn, there's something I'd like to do first, which is to acknowledge that I am currently in Gibsons, British Columbia in Canada. I'm in the unceded territory of the Salish and Squamish First Nations. So this is something I've learned to start doing, and I hope to bring into more of what I do. So I'm gonna just start with that. So I'm gonna share my screen. There we go. So as Renee said, I began dance very young, at the age of about 5 years old. I attended what would be called a performing arts school or professional dance school for many years. And then I had a 14-year career as a professional dancer on the world stage. So when Renee brought this subject to me of the Willing Apprentice, I looked over the quotes for the week in our almanac. And the quote that jumped out to me that really kind of just stood out was a quote by a man named Tony Buzan. He's an educator and English professor. And the quote reads, "Whatever your discipline, become a student of excellence in all things." So a student of excellence. So to me, that brought to mind the notion of humility. He's not saying be excellent. He's saying strive to learn excellence, or learn excellently, acknowledge your limitations, graciously receive information, recognize opportunities for growth. So it's this kind of aspiring idea. To voluntarily maybe lean into ever-changing goalposts. So things keep shifting. For a student, that happens on a regular basis, right? You're always being pushed to challenge yourself. And accepting that perfection is out of reach. So as a professional dancer, I relate very much to that idea, that perfection is out of reach. In dance, the prevailing mantra is you will never succeed. You will always have more to learn. There will always be somebody who can teach you more. So this is a constant, that perfection is out of reach, that you need to be willing to grow and learn. So dancers are students their entire careers, basically. So that mindset of the dancer, it puts you in a state of acceptance, of curiosity, of hunger. It's not static, it's not satisfied, it's never satiated, it's willingly open. And that's where creation occurs. So when the dancer, the actor, the musician is a willing student, is a canvas, and I don't mean a blank canvas, I mean a canvas with life experience, maybe some scratches and blotches, but still a canvas that is flexible, that is malleable, that is absorbable, When that relationship is established, that's when the choreographer or the director or the composer can affect it, can infuse it, can guide it, and can build a creation, can create art. That's where it happens. So an example of this is the dancer Mikhail Baryshnikov. So arguably one of the most accomplished dancers of the century. Okay, he is a master, he's an inspiration, but he is also a lifelong student. So he, in an interview with Nadine Meissner, who's a journalist in 2013, he said, "I'm a much better dancer in the studio than on stage because I have more fun in the studio. It's the freedom, the learning, doing the last stages of the work," he says. "I think every dancer should absorb themselves in the choreographer's work, and it's up to the choreographer to decide what colors to add." So in other words, he's saying the learning process, that's where the dance happens. And without the willingness to be the vessel, to be in that state, the creation won't happen, the dance won't occur. She also writes that Baryshnikov has the humility to know that he exists to serve the dancing moment, not the other way around. So he willingly exists to serve the moment, to serve art. Another example is a former colleague of mine. Her name is Azure Barton. She's the youngest of the 3 Barton sisters. They are all professional dancers. She's also the cousin of Heather Barton, who is one of our instructors at Still and Moving Center on Wednesday mornings. So all of them are dancers. And when Azure, who's the youngest, was in her early 20s, Misha, Mikhail Baryshnikov, sought her out, went to find her, and he expressed his interest in being part of her creative process. She was only a very, a budding choreographer at the time. He acknowledged that he could learn from Azure's unique process and that he wished to be her canvas. So this is an extreme example of someone with great stature and reputation casting themselves as an apprentice to someone who is many, many years his junior. Now, to be fair, this has been Misha's process for basically his entire career. He defected in the 70s, and this wasn't for politics, it was for art. It was to be able to have more opportunity to grow as an artist. He then sought out Balanchine, who was, still quite radical at the time, Twyla Tharp. He ended up with Mark Morris, the bad boy of contemporary dance in the 90s. So Baryshnikov, he continues to seek out new knowledge and ideas. He's in his 70s now, and he remains an eternal student. He remains a willing apprentice. He really is the example of that. Another contemporary of mine is a dancer called Jermaine Spivey. He's a very sought after American dancer. And when he speaks about his experience dancing for one of Canada's most celebrated choreographers, Crystal Pite, who's there on the right. Now, Crystal was my resident choreographer for 3 years. She's someone that I continue to draw inspiration from. Her works are in all of the major dance companies of the world. She began choreographing also very young in the early 90s. And from day one of her process, this is Jermaine speaking, I knew I had to continue working with her. There's always been a huge sense of trust between us. The more she gave, the harder I worked, the more I grew as an artist, and the more I wanted to give back to her. So this is really indicative that trust breeds output. Now, I worked with Crystal as well, and working with her, I learned that without that openness, that trust, the work is impossible. So vulnerability and risk-taking, those are hallmarks of her process. But trusting and being that vulnerable, it's a learned skill. You learn it over time. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to always be the student, but that's how she works. Another way to look at it is that the student or apprentice must work from a position of questioning or doubt, curiosity, instability. So we were talking about shifting goalposts at the beginning. So there's always something moving around. There has to be curiosity, because that's where evolution happens, and questions, experimentation. They're all catalysts that make, everything move, that make creation happen, art happen. So when I allow myself to be a student, I learn. Obvious, right? If I'm in that position, I'm going to learn something. And that's in dance, in management, in life. Being humble, allowing that we can still learn, submitting to it willingly. I took that experience as a dancer and I transpose it into everything I do. Now, this serves me really well. A prime example of that was March 2020, when the world changed And we all had to learn how to adapt. And in our case, it's still a moving center. We had to learn to transfer the entire operations online, right? A completely new skill set, but it was the only way to survive. So in that instance, the mindset that I had as a dancer served me really well. Here's another quote by Jermaine Spivey, dancer. He says that young people need time to make mistakes in a safe space with people that have already made a lot of mistakes and are still succeeding. So think of Mikhail Baryshnikov. He's the one with a lot of experience, but he's still making mistakes and he's still succeeding. So to dig in closely with working artists, understand that it's not about perfection, it's about substance. So this kind of work produces not only exceptional artists, but also a more complete, exceptional human being. I love that quote. These are my very basic ideas on how artists and dancers in particular, from my experience, really embody the idea of, or the notion of the willing apprentice, and how that mindset has a knock-on effect on anyone who practices or who witnesses art. So Baryshnikov says art breeds humanity and humility and educates people. So there is something that happens not only to the artist, but also to the audience. So it really is all encompassing. And I think in this case, it's really pertinent because for an artist, the learning never ends. It's a continuous thing. I'm going to close today with a quote by Liliuokalani, and I want to apologize in advance for my pronunciation, but here goes nothing. It's e onipa'aeka imi na'ao, be steadfast in the seeking of knowledge. I think that really, that speaks to the whole theme. So I want to thank you, Renee, and we can open it up to discussion.
Neela, that was really exquisite. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for, that must have taken a lot of digging to pull up all those photos from the past and to put them together so beautifully. You know how much I love quotes. I couldn't click the screen fast enough to capture all the quotes I loved. Oh, very inspirational.
Thank you.
I loved the quote. Well, I love so many of them, but the one near the end I happened to catch was art breeds humanity and humility and educates. What I got from that is when somebody serves as a willing apprentice to learn further in an art and to be able to therefore share it, they are educated in the process. And you mentioned something about the audience being educated as well. So I'm getting the sense of this ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So of course, like Baryshnikov is talking about the learning process being the most interesting part for him, right? That creative process, because that's where the artist is just absorbing, taking in. Of course, there's collaboration that happens to certain degrees with different creators. You're not always just, standing there dumbly and taking it in. You're also interacting and giving back, right? There is that life experience that you have as an artist to contribute as well. So that whole process is definitely one of an exchange, and there is humility on either side. It takes you into places emotionally that really the humanity aspect comes out. There has to be a certain degree of, resilience mentally and emotionally to be in that state as well. But then the finished product, when it's brought to the stage, as anybody who has experienced live performance or even, visual art, there's an aspect there that educates, hopefully, the person receiving it as well, right? So, however they're taking that on, they're learning something from that experience, they're gaining from that experience. So it is definitely a ripple, it's a knock-on, and it's why art is so important. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir to an audience like this, but there is something about that is, it's hard to express sometimes, but it is when you've experienced it, you get it. You know what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I could keep asking a lot of questions. So if somebody wants to break in, I want to let you do it.
In your experience with Circo de Lay, which I didn't get that right, Could you say something about what its aims were? It was very successful. It seemed very dramatic, somewhat risky with some of the moods and all. Could you say more about your experience and relative to what the aims were?
Sure, absolutely. So Cirque du Soleil is a Canadian organization that's been around for about 40 years now, almost, I think. They recently went bankrupt with COVID. We're hoping that they will come back to life. They are in the process of working with creditors and all that. But so Cirque du Soleil was originally founded by 3 main creators, and it was really owned for the most part by one director. His name is Guy Laliberté. And the goal, so circus has been around forever, right? So this is nothing new. Crazy, daredevil, high risk, exceptional acrobatics and feats of danger. This has been around since the beginning of time. These are things that we do to entertain ourselves. The difference with Cirque du Soleil is that traditional circus worked with acts. So the flying Zambinis have their act, and the people, the dog trainers have their act, and they are all separate. They may be part of a family circus and may do a few different things, but each act is kind of its own little world, its own little entity. What Cirque du Soleil radicalized was that they wanted to create an entire show, so 2-hour experience that had a thread. So either a story or a theme, all the music composed by one composer that they commissioned, all the choreography done by one choreographer, one set designer. You get the idea. Lighting, so composed as a whole. So it was considered contemporary circus because it was taking the da, 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 it was taking that and putting it into a more contemporary, relevant, immediate urban context, giving it some quite complex themes and through lines and characters. So that's what they radicalized. Now, that was 40 years ago. There are other companies that do that now. You see it a lot. They were the big fish in the little sea for a long time, and now there's a big ocean and there's a lot of opportunity. You see that even in rock stars and pop singers. They've started integrating those ideas into their performances to make them not just a series of songs, but a whole production. So that's what they did that was so special.
Thank you.
So they educated.
How did that impact you, in terms of what you had to experience, given the fact that there was so much going on within one theme?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I had spent my life, from the age of 5 years old in the dance world. The dance world is its own, it's its own kind of environment. It has its idiosyncrasies, like any, if you're in the military, if you're in high level gymnastics, you kind of develop these habits and expectations. And I thought joining Cirque du Soleil, I would walk in with all my experience and I wouldn't have that much to learn. Well, I was wrong. I walked into a situation where I was not dealing with professional dancers. So I was hired as a lead character, but I was very quickly also hired as a dance captain to take care of the choreography and the movement in the show. But I was having to take care of movement on acrobats and singers and musicians and not trained dancers, and even if they were highly skilled acrobats, so you would expect very, very physical people, very, very skilled at what they did, which may be flying on a trapeze or catching people or something like that, but not necessarily as a dancer. So there was a whole learning curve for me to learn how to teach non-dancers. And then the other part was that they were from, 20 different countries, aged 18 to 55. So here I was also dealing with different ages. I had always worked with a very narrow group of dancers who were around my age, because that career is not a very long one. Here I was dealing with, a big range of, actually, I had dancers who were acrobats who were in their teens as well at the time. So 14 years old, 15 years old, up to 55. And they were from China, they were from Russia, they were from Italy, they were from the US, all over. So also coming from their own backgrounds. I think one of the best examples was working with Chinese acrobats. So these are a troupe of Chinese acrobats that I had to work with who were from a military circus. Now, I had no idea what that was. I didn't even know that existed. But in China, there were these kind of propaganda machines with, you know, a military dance company and a military orchestra and a military circus. And there were a few of them, but we had a military circus on our show. And within the troupe, they had ranks. They were actually, you know, part of the army. And they had been recruited when they were 4 years old. So, you know, I came in expecting a level of professionalism and dedication, which is something that I had been used to in the dance world, where everybody is fighting for their position. You know, you come in and you know that 100 other people could take your job any moment. So you really, you're there, right? And here I had kids who'd been recruited when they were 4. This was their job for life, whether they liked it or not. And I was telling them, but don't you want to? Like, don't you feel passion for this? And it wasn't the answers I was expecting. I was sometimes getting, do we have to do this? Are you telling us this is what we have to do? All right, then fine, we'll do it now. Only because they had to, not because they wanted to. And that was foreign to me. So a lot of little things like that really educated me. So when I became an artistic director, it gave me a lot more knowledge to work with. I knew what I was dealing with when I was dealing with a giant Russian porter who was embarrassed to dance, that I had to train in a corner somewhere, you know, before he felt comfortable enough to go out in front of all of these kids who would laugh at him, you know, or things like that. So different experiences. I learned a lot.
Wow.
It sounds as if not all of them were willing apprentices.
No, but that was I went into dance as an artist. I approached it as an artist. And in Cirque, they recruited. So like I said, that was kind of an extreme example. This Chinese military circus were recruited into an army. But some of the acrobats were actually athletes. So think of, you know, gymnastics champion from 1994, who suddenly was now kind of at their end of their competing career. And what were they going to do? Well, let's go perform for a while and make some money. And so they would come in with these incredible trick pony, you know, kind of, I've done gymnastics my whole life. This is what I do. And we had to teach them to be artists, to be performers. So it was funny because we made sure to always call them all artists, but they weren't really coming from artistic backgrounds. You know, we'd have a musician from the industry who was, you know, 30 years experience in the music industry working with the musical greats on stage with a acrobat gymnast who would come in and had barely 2 months stage experience. So yeah, there was that. They weren't always in the same space to receive. Yeah.
I'm wondering what it's like as someone who's the teacher to a variety of apprentices. What makes the best apprentice? And then how would you apply that in life?
So Renee knows this. I'm not actually, I don't love teaching. Honestly, I like, and so I don't like teaching for, you know, just to teach, let's say classes that are repetitive. I like being involved in creation. So I like mentoring artists. I like coaching artists. I like being in the director's capacity, guiding creation to create a finished product and, you know, rehearsing them to that end. I'm not necessarily interested in like creating a class and teaching it and creating a class and teaching. We have a lot of other people, especially at Still Moving Center, who love doing that. Thank goodness. But I think in my capacity more as a director and a coach, that ability to exchange, like I said, you know, the artist needs to be willing to take in and to learn, but I think the coach learns through that process as well. I think that the coach and the director is getting the feedback off of it, is seeing how it works, reconsidering, maybe getting some feedback elsewhere and pulling it in. And so there's a constant learning happening on both sides. And so, yeah, I think, of course, you know, working with artists who are really open and is amazing. It's always great. You don't want somebody that's just blocking you every step of the way, obviously. but who also proposes, an artist who can, you know, I would say that the parallel would be when you're working in management, you ask people to bring you solutions, not problems, right? Something's not working, don't come to me to just complain about it. Come to me saying, this is the problem. These are a few solutions that I could think of. What do you think? And then that's where the discussion happens and things can move. And that's a much nicer exchange than just receiving complaints, obviously.
Yeah. I'm curious about other people's experiences, either as an apprentice themselves or working as mentor to those who are apprentices. Lonnie.
This is such a great topic. Thank you so much, Neela, for that beautiful presentation and for everything you do for us at Still and Moving Center. We wouldn't be having this discussion without you. So as an apprentice myself, I've been really moved this past week with many of the posts on NIA International and the NIA Facebook group as we transition the NIA community from our headquarters that had been there for 33 years. And I had the honor and joy to train and to visit in 2018 for my Moving to Heal certificate. And then prior to that as well as a visitor, just as a guest. It's been so moving to see not just my own remembrance of my own training as an apprentice NIA student and teacher, but also teachers and mentors sharing their photos from decades of learning and exactly what you were saying, this exchange that takes place that is so beautiful when it's a loving, healing, uplifting experience. And that's what I think of when I think of the Willing Apprentice, that you're not just there to learn, you're there to grow. And you also are there in a way to teach. There's always something I learn from my students in everything I do. And so that's really stood out for me as a mentor, as a coach, and as a mentor and as a teacher. I always aim to have inclusiveness in my classes so that people have their needs met. So I always start a class asking, what are you here to receive? What is it that you would like, you know, for me to share, or, you know, without assuming what it is, because it's sometimes not at all. I mean, we can assume if it's a yoga class, they're going to want to do some yoga, but not always, you know. So it's really, it's been such a joy to be part of many different groups that honor and value the role of the apprentice and the teacher, the master, or the mentor. And yoga as well. So I would say David is my yoga mentor and teacher. Not at the moment, unfortunately, I'm not taking a class with him because of my schedule, but Claudia, another mentor. Of course, Renee's my NIA mentor and teacher, and Britta and Winnalee, you know, and then Melt. Like there's just so many things. And then in life, I love how you included, Neela, that it's not just about, you know, the arts or a study. It really is something you can apply in life. So I do that as well. And I really feel that everything I've learned is applicable in what I do. And there's still so much to learn. I'm never bored because there's always more fun things to learn.
So I just wanted to speak to what Lonnie said. You know, this Still and Moving Center is a special place that really tries to embody all of that. The dance world is competitive. You know, the dance world isn't always a beautiful exchange. It isn't always a healing place, right? Just to be very clear, the term apprentice, you know, there is a hierarchy in professional dance, in classical ballet. You know, the apprentice is really the bottom of the barrel. I mean, I started as an apprentice in my first job as a, you know, working for Les Grands Canadiens, and it was, you know, if a choreographer chose me to do something, as soon as the choreographer was out the door, or even to his face, they would say, no, she's just an apprentice, you can't use her. You need to start with somebody who's in a higher rank. There is definitely, you know, there's a learning experience, just, you know, learning to be humble about that. And like I said, it's not always a beautiful exchange. You know, you really have to be willing to take it, be resilient with it. And that's part of the learning as well, because it's not always nice. The comments aren't always nice. They push you, and that's the point, because it's competitive. So my first class, when I joined the professional dance school, I was in 6th grade. I was about 11 years old. And from that first class, I mean, I'd been dancing since I was 5, but in the professional school, that first class, I'm the only one who became a professional dancer. There was about 30 of us. So through the years, people got weeded out. You know, you either made it or you didn't. So there's a learning to that as well, but it's not always as nice and pleasant and healing, and just to be clear.
Neela, I'd love to ask about perfection. You brought up this idea of perfection at the beginning, and I'm just thinking about how, like, you know, I love all the things that you said about perfection. You know, you never get there, right? It's like, it's this idea, but somehow it's so potent for us, and like, we have to develop our relationship with this idea of perfection and somehow still move forward and not be paralyzed by it or somehow crushed by it, which I think can often happen to people. So I'm just sort of curious, like, in your experience, like, you have this, I mean, the idea exists, but like, how did you last for so long without getting your soul crushed, or, you know, or just like not giving up, right? Because that idea is there, like, somehow it's this potent idea of perfection, but yeah, but we don't want to be crushed by it. So what have you learned about that?
Yeah, and you know, when I was talking about that competitive world, there is a lot of that neurosis, maybe, or that competitive, you know, quality that can crush, that can very easily drive people to, you know, I can't do this anymore, that's it, I'm done, right? And so, you know, when you see a dance performance, you know that every single step that they're going to be performing, they've rehearsed thousands of times, right? It's not like you suddenly jump on stage with something. Yes, there's improvisation, but even improvisation is practiced, right? In the sense that you do it enough to be able to then present your improv on stage. So there's always kind of, every time you perform that step, it's different, it's new, it's live. And this is why, you know, there's such a difference to live performance versus video, right? When you watch a performance that's filmed, when you're in the audience or when you're on the stage, that exchange of energy changes your performance every time. So the performance is never the same. So I think the mindset that you're asking about is that, no, it's not perfection, but it's always different. So you have to content yourself with that, maybe. And I'd say an example of that for me would be, so I started in repertoire companies where we would work with 3 or 4 choreographers a year. So we were always creating new material and doing new things. So there was kind of that great, you know, at least opportunity to learn kind of and change and do something different. Working with Cirque, it was the same performance for 3 years that I performed probably 1,100 times. The exact same show 1,100 times. Now, I was a lead character. I had a little more, you know, flexibility than the other, you know, acrobats or other dancers. You know, I wasn't in a group. I didn't have to do the same thing as everybody else. I could do what I wanted to do. It's within a certain parameter, but it was still a challenge for me going from repertoire to Cirque and performing the same thing 1,100 times, like 10 times a week. You know, that resilience, that was hard, because you're not only trying to attain perfection, you're also trying to attain like excitement for what you're doing, interest, right? After like a certain number of times, you're like, I can do this, and I'm still doing my grocery list in my head, which is a horrible place to be on stage. You don't want to be there, right? You always want to be excited or moved or exchanging. So I'd say, yeah, that would be kind of how you deal with it. It's by, you know, even if it's something so slight that the audience would never know, it's enough to inspire you as an artist. And that's where great directors come in, because directors, that's what, in a context like that, that's what I learned with my artist as an artistic director for Cirque was that it wasn't about constantly changing what they did. It was giving them just enough food to kind of, and they were all different with what they needed, right? But just enough food to kind of inspire them to do it again, and do it the 9th time and the 10th time that week, and then start again and again and again, and never be tired, because you don't want them to lose interest, because then the audience loses interest, everybody loses interest. It's not a performance anymore, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's, I think, where I put myself.
Diana, do you have a something to relate this to within the different realms that you've worked in?
Well, I think as a life coach, what I talk about is that we're perfect the way we are, and that we are evolving. And a client will say, well, when will I get there? And I said, there's no there to get. It's like it's spiral. You just even go back over the same things when you're talking about repetition. It's like you may have thought you handled that in your 20s, and at 60 you're already revisiting it. It's like we just go deeper or higher or whatever, which way it goes. But it's like really learning how do we accept ourselves where we are and still bring that, like you said, that freshness and that humility and willing to learn. And it's never ending. That's the glory of it. I said, if it ends, we're dead. So it's like we can really appreciate that we are doing that. And even with a meditation practice, it's like, how do we bring this only moment of life and death and follow divine wisdom and divine guidance with a feeling of gratitude and appreciation, and really be present to this moment, whether we've done it 100 times or not, or that 1100 is quite a few, but to really be able to bring a freshness and a gratitude and a presence to everything that we do. And to me, that's what my spiritual practice is being aware and present in this only moment with love and gratitude. So that's what I was relating to. Thank you. I loved your talk. I thought it was really, really wonderful. Thank you.
Fariba, you come from a culture that I think of as having quite a bit of discipline. I imagine that there is very much of a mentor apprenticeship kind of classic model that might be followed within your culture, but I may be wrong.
Mostly, if we go back to the tradition, is to learn the tradition has this way of teaching that you become, for example, you go to level 1 and your teacher is somebody who just had learned the level 1, but master it well enough to teach the level 1. And then you become the person who teach the level 1 while you are in level 2. And it goes on like that. So in terms of mentorship, the mentor is the one who just learned it and can teach back. And so once you can teach it, you have learned it, basically. That's what I can think of. But in terms of the wonderful talk we had, I did also take photos of some of the quotes. They were excellent. And the first quote was really interesting. Whatever your discipline become a student of excellent in all things. And I think it does capture somewhat of what I mentioned, because you have to become excellent enough in what you just learned to be able to teach it. Am I correct in that?
Yes. I think as far as my dance career is concerned, when I started performing as a professional dancer in dance companies, it's very important, and it happens very often, that you teach your roles to another dancer. So it often, yes, there are rehearsal masters, there are, ballet masters, there are people that can kind of oversee that and sometimes even teach the steps, but often it's the dancer who's just performed it that will teach it to their second cast or to the next person that will be taking over that position. So you learn right away as a performer how to coach other dancers, right? And you're not great at it to start out with. Anyways, in my case, I know I was not a great coach to start with. I just kind of had an idea of, well, you just do it like this. And I would just show them because I could still do it. And then when I was 25, I was pregnant, and I suddenly had to teach my roles to someone, but I couldn't show them the moves. I would kill the partner, right? I was huge. So I said, look, he can't pick me up right now, but you have to feel like, and then I had to learn how to express that with words. It was really challenging at the time, to kind of verbalize, well, you need to feel like you're like this, but the arm is in your head is going to feel, so all of those, that process of learning how to teach is also very much part of the dance tradition. So yeah, I connect with that, Vadivel, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really, you never know why you choose to go to a talk. And today when I was coming in, I said, I'm sure you learned something, but you made me very compassionate to look back when I was 5 years old or 4 years old. I was in dance school, I think, until up to 12. And one day I'm like, nope, basketball it's not dance. So with all you explain, I become very compassionate toward my youngest self, because I have looked back many times and regret it. Thank you.
I think
more compassion toward us is welcome.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that first group of students, when I was very young, that first group of students in 6th grade, that none of them became professional dancers, but none of them walked away not having learned something. There's definitely something really beneficial for anyone to get an arts education, not necessarily to that degree, but this is where, art in school and dance and music, these are important things because you do learn from them, whether you go into that field or not. I'm glad I took mathematics, but I'm not an accountant, thank goodness. My mom is, and I never wanted to be an accountant, but I don't regret having learned math, right? So I think we have to look at it that way. I learned music. I didn't become a musician, but I'm glad I learned it. I apply it somewhere else, right? I think, yeah, there should never be regret to that. Oh, I should have, I admire anybody who's, had that as part of their education. I think it's great. And I tried to get my son to dance. He didn't want to dance he never wanted to dance. And then all of a sudden he decided he wanted to take tap dance 1 year, and that was it. That was the level of his dance education. So that was all.
One of the reasons, on a personal note, I got many times the spell because I laugh a lot. And I
yeah,
still do.
There's no dance. There's no laughing in dance class.
I see that we have someone joining us, Gabrielle. And Gabrielle, just the way that you hold yourself, you look to me as if you might be a dancer. This is just a pure guess, but I just would love to have you chime into the discussion from any aspect you'd like to.
Well, thank you very, very much for that lovely compliment. I'm not a dancer, but I must have been a dancer in a previous life because I get that comment all the time. I love to dance because I jumped in quite a bit late into the conversation. I don't know what I can possibly contribute. So I'll just kind of leave it at that, unless there's a specific question that you may have.
Have you had the experience of either being an apprentice to someone who is mentoring you, or have you been a mentor to somebody who is apprenticing to you? And if you've had either of those experiences, that would be relevant to our discussion here.
I could actually chime in just for a moment, because Gabriel's a guest of mine, and he and I were having a discussion basically around this whole idea of mentoring just prior to logging in. So welcome, Gabriel.
Thanks, David. Thank you. Yes, I have definitely been an apprentice. My mentor teaches a rare lineage of Lomi Lomi massage called Ke Alahoku, the pathway to the stars. So she lives on Maui, and I have trained with her for 7, 8 years. I did so many different retreats with her, whether it was 6, 7, 10, 14, and a 30-day apprenticeship with her on various occasions as a participant and as an assistant. In the last 2 years, many have been asking me to share what I have learned as they have experienced my massage, or if they happen to hear from someone or seen what I have offered in some way, shape, or form. And just being very, honest and vulnerable. I've had quite a bit of hesitation and wanting to share that. There's a part of me that feels that there still needs to be more embodiment of that work. And yet, just today, someone said, would you be willing to share your wisdom or knowledge in a retreat setting or in a workshop setting or in a class setting? And I just went, and I happen to be right now in Chile, and I went, that's definitely a possibility. And so it seems that is coming into my life much, much more. Again, in full honesty and transparency, I just have a little bit of a hesitation with that, as I've just shared earlier today with David. Yes, that is a huge calling to share that. And even with that hesitation, I just feel there is something within me that is wanting to just share, because it's not just meant for me, and how others receive it, that's up to them. I'm not fully in control of that. I can only share from my internal universe, and how that is interpreted by them, I'm not in control of. So I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think it points to something that I would talk about maybe as lineage, and that you are part of a definite lineage. And I would imagine that your kumu has been trained by her kumu before her. And so that hesitation is in part of respect for the greatness of the lineage that you follow, and a wanting to be able to measure up in what it is that you pass on. So I can imagine that it's partly a matter, I understand, in such lineages of receiving permission to pass on. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And what I've also learned is that, especially even during this pandemic, is that permission, where is that permission coming from? What is the source of that permission? What is the origin point of that permission? Is it coming from a place of wanting to protect, quote unquote, this lineage? Because then from my perspective, that then begins to color that permission a bit, instead of, as I've read and been told of the person who created Kahu Abraham Kawai, people who I didn't give permission to went and still did it. And it's like, I can't control them. And then people that I just give permission to didn't want to go do it, and so on and so forth. And there's the full range. I then come back to what is best for that person, what is best for that moment, what is best for, and again, the what is coloring that allowing of permission on both ends, whether to honor and respect that permission or to not honor and respect that. And so that's a little bit of that battle, again, in that full honesty and transparency. Whereas, if let's just say, I'm not given permission for 5 years, and then in the most horrible situation, my mentor dies,
Yeah.
Now, no one is ever supposed to share anything from that.
Right. Right.
If this pandemic, in my opinion, hasn't taught us on another level, which I already knew, nothing is permanent.
Right.
Nothing is permanent.
Mm.
And so finding that balance in between those two things, honoring her and honoring myself.
And you're actually pointing to honoring the teaching itself, which transcends either of you.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so finally, in the end, you're almost asking the actual teaching. Am I ready? And do I have someone with me who's ready to receive it? There I go. It's
Exactly.
You'll know. You'll absolutely know. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, wow, for the opportunity.
Sandra, nice to have you join us. Did you have
Aloha, everybody. Thank you, Neela and everybody. Nice to see you. It's kind of windy. I don't know if you can hear me, but yeah, I just wanted to say, I've been have had the honor of having Renee as a mentor and Nia for over 10 years. And I think one of the things that really drew me to Nia was just the overriding principle of the joy of movement and the fact that you just can't do it wrong. So I think that's has really just, informed a lot of the things that I've pursued since Nia too, just stepping into things with curiosity and doing things, my way and finding my way through different types of learning experiences. And also when I share things with people, to make sure that they feel that as well, that it's about them to just, make it their own and to do it their way, whether that's, making a recipe that I've shared or anything. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I do want to just share, in case it's relevant, especially with some of the experiences that Neela has gone through. My first experience at NIA headquarters that Lonnie referred to as having been in existence for 33 years and now is about to transition out of, I think, being brick and mortar. And so there were two founders of NIA, Carlos Rosas and Debbie Rosas. And when I went to Portland to get my NIA white belt training, I went up with the kind of approach of being a student who was used to having exchanges with my teachers, and we're almost peers, except they had, a different, they had slightly different position in terms of me, but we were always able to exchange with one another. So after Carlos Rosas gave his first presentation on the first day of class, I went up and he had told us about the four, the four agreements it was called. And this is from the Mayan tradition. And he had us write them down. And so I went up and showed him how I had written them down in a slightly different way, because, these were placed in a kind of a negative way with that we don't do this. And so I always like to put things in the positive way. Well, I get about half that far through my statement to him. Like, I just felt like, I'm not saying the right thing, am I? And I found out that this was a man from Mexico who has been trained in very traditional ways. And there are teachers and there are students. And if you are here to learn, why don't you sit down and listen and learn? Otherwise, why did you come if you just want to go and tell me how you're going to do it your own way? It was very, very humbling. And I barely made it through that week of white belt training. Just barely, because I was always running into this this very traditional teaching style that was completely foreign to me. I'm so glad that I had the humility that you're talking about, Neela, to stick it out.
Yeah, I mean, the notion,
not have still and moving.
Exactly. How many times, I mean, I don't know how many times you've heard the expression, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You know, you have a teacher that'll tell you you need to listen more than you speak, right? There's that. And Sandra speaking about, you know, you can never do it wrong with Nia. Well, in dance, you're always doing it wrong in professional dance. So and you have to just learn to be kind of resilient to that. Yeah. So it's a different environment for sure. Yeah.
So many different kinds of teachers, and we are talking about Nia. And in fact, you know, there was a certain amount of freedom that Carlos taught us in Nia, and he was the teacher teaching it to us that we needed to respect in order to learn that. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Is there somebody who would like to offer a vote of thanks for today? Sharon?
Yes, I do, because Mikhail Baryshnikov is my favorite dancer. And so I was so thrilled that Neela used him as an example, and she heightened even my love for him with all the quotes that she shared and everything. I mean, I loved him so much, I was going to name my firstborn child Mikhail. But I thought a boy in Hawaii got to live with Mikhail. But I named him Micah, which is a form of Mikhail. But I can't thank you enough for sharing all the things about him. And one of my questions is that, did you ever get to meet him and encounter with him at all? Because he is, I mean, all the things you shared is just, I got to see him dance when he came to Honolulu, but he is an incredible person, and you've even made him, you know, bigger than life now too.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon.
Mahalo. Mahalo nui loa.
I never got to meet him, unfortunately. I never met him in person. I lived vicariously through my friend Azure, who became his protege for many years, actually. So when he started White Oak Dance Project in New York, when he was, like I said, already in his mid-50s or so, he hired her. I think she was pretty much his first, or one of his first resident choreographers. So White Oak Dance Project was really him deciding to dance in his 50s or continue dancing in his 50s, and also have a lot of other dancers who were mature dancers with him on stage. And it was really, you know, very contemporary, very experimental. And here was this little 20-year-old Azure, you know, like working with them. And so she always inspired me, and I kind of lived vicariously through her, you know, how she met him for the first time in an elevator, and, you know, things like that. And, you know, she was this Canadian dancer who kept going back and forth across the border to just do gigs and put on shows, and then hurry back to Canada and head back to New York and work 3 waitressing jobs. You know, very inspiring person. So yeah, and Misha, you know, everything she said about him, he's just as incredible as, you know, as on stage. You know, just experiencing Misha on stage is it's definitely, it should be on everybody's bucket list.
Well, you picked an incredible, you picked the best apprentice you could have to, you know, show us an example. You truly did. Mahalo nui loa for your talk. It was just wonderful, and it touched my heart a lot.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. I just want to let everybody know next week that our theme for the week will be crafting our speech. Speak clearly if you speak at all, carve every word before you let it fall, is the quote for the week from Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. And we are going to go to the tradition of nonviolence, and from that, more specifically, nonviolent communication week. And we are so grateful to Neela for your talk and your presentation, all those beautiful quotes and photographs, and the heart from which you spoke. Thank you so much. Aloha.